We are joined by a damn good friend of the show, the man himself, Michael Maloof. Michael Maloof, he is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, author, and regular contributing analyst of RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service experience in the Department of Defense. Michael, welcome to the show, man. How you doing this morning? You doing okay?
Well, I'm great. I hope you are as well.
I am doing much better, and thank you for that. I apologize for having to cancel yesterday. I think I apologize to the audience too. I had a medical issue that I need to resolve, and I couldn't necessarily do it at the show because it was taking place early that morning. So thank you for this, and I thank you for accepting my apology on that.
Of course.
I am super curious on your take. So Putin came out and effectively said the UN should take external governance over Ukraine. Now, his reason is very straightforward, and it's the exact same reason that the Trump administration was trying to find a way to get rid of Zelensky. Nothing can get done with Zelensky and that government that is currently in Kiev. And so Putin's like, okay, well, why don't the UN take over? We want to have negotiations. We need somebody to sign a peace deal. Zelensky is illegitimate from our point of view, and even I would imagine from the Trump administration's point of view. So what if the United Nations takes external control, send peacekeepers in, and have legitimate, fair elections with the interim government presiding over it? Now, this came out several media outlets. I used TASS for this. Give me your take on this. He's saying, and gave multiple instances where this had been done before, where the UN would take control of a government if the government wasn't necessarily legit. What are the chances of this?
Well, it has happened before, and somewhat successful, and not so successful in other cases. But for the most part, I think I don't think it's going to work in this case. Zelensky needs to hold on for dear life. He's being encouraged. He's being encouraged to hold on by Macron and Starmer of UK, and that gives him all the more reason to perpetuate his existence there. And he cannot afford. What's emerging in my mind, at least, is that he cannot afford to settle because he'll be dead within 24 hours. So he's going to have to he's going to have to continue and perpetuate what is going on. He's Zelensky. Not that I feel so sorry for him, but he is caught between the proverbial rock and hard place. And as long as he's receiving some encouragement from the Europeans, it gives him more ability and standing, frankly, to carry on. And I doubt that the UN would want to undertake that unless it had the consent of the Ukrainians, and they're not going to. I don't think they're going to abide by it. I think Putin, for his part, is looking for ways to settle because he has larger agendas other than just Ukraine. But and I think the United States also is in the same boat because it ultimately wants to come to terms with Putin, with Ukraine, because it wants to do more geostrategic type of arrangements and normalize relationships. The thing that could knock everything out, even Ukraine, and any settlement with Ukraine, ultimately, to me, is Netanyahu, because if he decides to take on Iran, that brings in Russia it pits Russia against the United States, because Trump has really begun to back Netanyahu in everything that he wants to do. So there is some there's a potential relationship developing there, or connection, I should say, developing there that we got to watch. And it seems to me that by summer, if he cannot get that, if Trump can't get that agreement that he called for as a replacement for the agreement that he dropped out of, even though Iran was in full compliance at the time, namely the JCPOA, then I think he's going to allow Netanyahu to do what he wants. For Netanyahu's purposes, he needs to do something like that because of his own internal strife. His country, once again, is on the verge of civil war. So you can see that there is some relationship, and I think that Russia would come to Iran's assistance given the strategic arrangement they just recently signed. So there's all this connectivity that we've got to keep an eye on. I mean, you got multiple balls in the air at this point, and this is what's making everything so precarious, particularly now that we're into spring and we'll be going into summer. And already you've got Netanyahu bombing South Lebanon and has already given evacuation orders for South Beirut this morning. So here we go again.
We're back to this.
Yeah,
all right.
we're coming back to it. So these are things that need to be weighed and watched, because I think Ukraine, as much as Putin, as much as Donald Trump wants to settle that and settle with Russia, this other matter could just be the proverbial poop in the punch bowl.
Well, I somebody took a dump in the punch bowl. I that is fascinating. I agree with you. I've thought to myself, like, okay, you may solve the conflict with Ukraine and then end up with another conflict in Iran, and that would just, bring Russia back into it.
Sure.
Staying with the Russia part for a moment, and then we could bounce to Netanyahu and Trump and how Russia plays into that.
Well, we gave an overview.
Yeah, totally. The talks that took place in Riyadh between the U.S. and Russia, 12 hours on the Black Sea Initiative and restarting that. Part of the deal that they were coming to a conclusion with is, okay, we'll allow the stuff in the Black Sea. However, we're not doing anything until you remove sanctions. And the rub is that the sanctions are coming out of Europe, meaning even if Trump himself wanted to remove the sanctions, he has to get Europe on board in order to do so. And this is the same Europe that has been doing any and everything in their power to crush or crash the peace initiative. You have Starmer and Macron looking for a coalition of the willing to put troops in. Starmer's military told them flat out, we have no capacity to do the things that you're talking about doing. I have serious doubts about France being able to do it. Those people will be killed immediately. They're looking for America to be a backstop. Up to this point, Trump has said no to this notion of being a backstop. Maloney has said no to this notion of putting in troops. So they have ideas, but they don't seem to have the military capacity to enact those ideas, even though they've been doing any and everything in their power to combat any notion of negotiations between the U.S. and Russia to end the war. Considering that the sanction relief is an element of this, and it's going to be a big element of it, right? Russia, because they've lost the war, so you need to bring in things beyond the war. Sanctions is something that goes beyond the war, and it shows goodwill in the context of the U.S. that, yes, the U.S. will follow through. See, we removed the sanctions. Are you all not entertained? Give me your take on this. I mean, how does the U.S. put the screws to Europe to get them on board? And do you think that they will factionalize? I mean, the fact that Italy has effectively said no, Slovakia, Hungary are probably going to be on Italy's side in this. How does the U.S. get Europe on board to remove those sanctions? Or can the U.S. even do it?
Probably yes and no. Yes, in the sense that the United States, when you consider that NATO countries are so reliant right now on U.S. military equipment, including F-35s and stuff like that, their armor or what have you. This puts them at some disadvantage because they don't have the industrial base to replicate all of that in near real time. Mm-hmm. And it will take them years and years. And so they're going to sort of be dragged along until they can become self-reliant militarily once again, which will take years, if ever, given that they would have to switch their entire industrial base when you consider it. They have some stuff, but they're not to the production levels that they would need to sustain any potential conflict with Russia, of all people, of all places. I mean, it's so that's something that is a long-term problem. And by then, I think NATO is going to be gone anyway, because if once the U.S. comes to an agreement with Russia on more geostrategic issues, I think Trump is basically saying, Europe, you're on your own. We have helped you fight 2 world wars already, and all you can do is get yourself. You have a suicidal mentality, and all of your disputes are based upon ancient feuds, and we're tired of them.
Agreed. They are. I've asked the question myself. It's like, dude, you started 2 world wars. Why are you trying to start a third?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they seem committed to doing it.
And you see, and you listen to Starmer and Macron, and you're thinking, what is wrong with you people? Why do you insist upon pressing this issue of moving troops in, knowing that it's going to be a tripwire? It's going to be a tripwire, and it's going to create more problems. Plus, then they talk about countries of the willing. Well, that negates Article 5 right there.
Yes.
And so, if you want to go at it with against Russia, who has more nuclear bombs than they do combined, and also has hypersonics, which they do not, it doesn't balance. So I don't know what I mean. They have to have a suicidal mentality to continue this line of thinking. Why they don't get along and try to get back to things to pre-crisis times. And okay, Europe depended upon Russia for its energy, for example. Go back to that. Why not? Because what you're getting from the U.S. is being charged to, up the kazoo for energy, and it's taking years. It would take years for them to find alternative sources. Europe doesn't have those sources. Russia has them. Middle East, but Middle East, like the U.S., charges exorbitant prices for those imports. And these countries are net exporting countries. They rely on outside markets to survive. U.S. doesn't need that. So the U.S. can become much more self-inclusive, and that's basically what's happening right now, as opposed to Europe. And that's why you see Europe charging all these tariffs, because they cannot afford to see Chevrolets driving on the Autobahn, because of their own markets and stuff like that, as one example. So they're at a disadvantage, and they need to cut the losses, suck it up, and learn to get along. And also, before they could resist, because they knew they had U.S. support, but U.S. has other priorities now.
Well, I guess my question would be, do you think that Trump could get them to remove those sanctions? Like, for example, Marco Rubio gave this speech, and I'm trying to find the speech. I had it queued up, and I think I got rid of the speech. But Rubio effectively pointed out, look, we need to, part of the deal that they were coming up with was sanction removal right here. This is Rubio effectively saying, hey, if we're going to get anything done, if we're going to get any deal, we need to remove sanctions. We need to look at the stuff. And again, the issue is, this is the speech.
The first is we have more. We met with the Ukrainians twice, the Russians once. What we have here is an agreement in principle on a Black Sea ceasefire. We got 2 things from that. The first is we have more detailed definition of what the energy ceasefire entails. And the second is the principle concept of a Black Sea ceasefire. Obviously, after our meeting, as part of their release, the Russians detailed a number of conditions that they want to see met in order to do that. So we're going to evaluate that. Some of those conditions include sanctions that are not ours. They belong to the European Union. So we're going to be gathering, and sort of when our folks get back, sitting down, going through the proposals, getting their impressions of the conversations, so we can more fully understand what the Russian position is, or what their ask is in exchange. And then we'll present that to the president. We'll ultimately make a decision about what the next step is.
All right. So effectively, he acknowledges, look, some of these sanctions are not even ours.
Right.
Will Europe remove those sanctions?
I don't think so. Or because the United States is basically giving up its leverage over Europe. And the Europeans are saying, well, if we got to go on our own. But again, the Europeans fundamentally are suicidal. I don't think that common sense will prevail in their minds. They for some reason, they will insist upon that resistance to Russia for historical reasons. They have always done that. Europe has tried many times, whether it was Britain or the French. Historically, they've always gone to war with the Russians and lost, and yet they continue along that mindset, using Ukraine as an ability to continue that aggravation. But at some point, they've got to come to terms, and right now the leadership in both countries is not there. They're going to have to change the leadership and change the whole mentality, and begin to focus pretty much and become more populist, pretty much like the U.S. has, in order for their own self-preservation, and recognizing the reliance that they still have on outside sources for their energy and what have you. And they need to rebuild their industries, because they have become so depleted now. And if they intend to rebuild a military, it's definitely going to require a greater industrial buildup. And they're just not there. And they're already in recession.
You said the U.S. has given up its leverage over Europe. What is that leverage?
Well, it's giving up the leverage in terms of basically saying, look, if you want to go your own route defensively, go ahead. Yeah, it's giving it up, and because the U.S., I think, in the Trump mentality, they've given up on Europe. We've moved on from a Cold War. We've moved on from the years of catering to Europe's inability to solve its own issues. Look at Bosnia. I mean, 16 countries at the time couldn't resolve the Bosnian issue until we came in and started bombing, and then it became a U.S. war. Why?
Yeah.
I mean, you had 16 countries that couldn't deal with their own regional problem.
By the way, shipping. Yemen is another good example. In the conversation with J.D. Vance, that's been exposed in the leaks, Vance was pointing out, look, this is a European issue. This is not our issue. And they easily in the chat was like, yeah, Europe can't do it. Europe doesn't have the capability of doing it. And so we need to do it. It's fascinating.
Yeah, well, and the point's well taken. I mean, that's why that signal issue became more of a foreign policy discussion than anything. It's sensitive. Yeah, you don't normally air those kinds of things. The whole signal gate thing is a separate issue, but it was predominantly a foreign policy discussion about whether or not Europe should be fending for itself. Look, most of its trade goes through the Red Sea as opposed to U.S. trade. But yet the United States, when they undertook this, what's it called, Prosperity Guardian or something like that, they invited other NATO countries to come in. The French were there for a period. The Brits were there for a period. The Germans refused to join. Yet all those countries, those countries have basically pulled out except for the Brits. And they have maybe one or two ships in there as part of this coalition of the willing to do this operation in the Red Sea, and yet the U.S. is basically is having to bear the brunt of all and responsibility of maintaining the security of shipping right now of Western shipping in the Red Sea, when our amount is like 2% as opposed to 20 or 30% by Europe.
Yeah, really good point. Fascinating point. But let's go to Iran for a moment, because I'm glad you brought that up. Trump, let's say Trump gets what he wants. He signs a deal with Putin, shakes hands, new security architecture of Europe. He goes to Moscow, signs a document, gets his photo op. And then he decides, okay, well, we can't stop the Houthis from bombing. And so now we're going to Iran because we believe that Iran is controlling the Houthis, which, again, it's not true. From my understanding, that is not true. The Houthis are their own thing, even if they may get technical assistance from Iran. Iran has said that they wanted to make a deal, Pezeshkian anyway, the president. Ayatollah says, no, we're not going to negotiate under threat. Donald Trump sends a letter that says you have 2 months to come to some kind of agreement. This was a pressure campaign by Donald Trump. He had the pressure campaign in the first term. He resumed it the second term. This time, no, he's threatening military force. The Ayatollah says, look, we're not going to negotiate a threat. And as you pointed out, they have agreements with Russia. They're close to China. They're ensconced in the BRICS organization. This is a different world than what they were in the first time around when Donald Trump was running this pressure campaign. Break this down for me. The truth of the matter is, even if they don't necessarily have, let's say, a military agreement with Iran in the sense of we will go to war for you, they will still be given weapons, support, resources, etc., for Iran to deal with this. And I don't know what the U.S. is planning on that is going to stop Iran from a response if indeed the U.S. strikes, meaning all hell breaks loose. Iran will shut the Strait of Hormuz. They will attack regional allies of the United States. Hell, they may go after the U.S. bases in the region, killing all of these people. Is Trump really willing to destroy his presidency for Netanyahu?
Well, that is one of the major questions being asked. A man who seeks peace in one area is advocating war and letting somebody else basically drag us into a conflict. No, you're absolutely right. I think since Trump's first term, things have moved along very much in terms of the relationship of Russia, China with Iran.
Mm-hmm.
For those countries and for BRICS and Belt and Road, as you point out, Iran has become so critical. It's become the key north, south, and east-west corridors for both BRICS and for the Belt and Road. And that's why, and on top of that, China itself relies upon most of its oil imports from Iran. And so does China, so does Japan, and most of the Far East countries. So, you know, they're not going to want to have a war going on with Iran, given that dependency, because they're going to have to find alternative sources. And the oil, the type of oil that China requires, and even Japan, is a crude oil that, or even a refined oil that you cannot find it, let's say, in Saudi Arabia. It's totally different. The quality of the oils are different. That's why you see, even though Saudi Arabia is willing to sell oil, it's not of the type that China requires for its own industries, as much as they get from the, I guess, the sweet crude from Iran right now. I'm not an oil connoisseur, so I can't give you the stages of the qualities, but
yeah,
but there are differences in the quality and the type of oil from each one of those regions and countries in that region. So that's the last thing any of those countries are going to want is a conflict with Iran. And whether Trump has come to that conclusion, I'm sure that there are back channels going on right now to the Trump administration by these countries expressing this concern. And if considering the fact that Trump does have a relationship with Xi Jinping, I'm sure that he's hearing it from the Chinese angle as well. But for some reason that no one can explain, Netanyahu has this hold on Trump, and Trump just seems to cater to every whim that Netanyahu has. Does that mean that is that because of the Israeli lobby? Is it because of the U.S. defense lobby? His donors. I know he has a commitment to Miriam Edelman, but even she has a problem with Netanyahu these days, as I understand it. Mm-hmm. So, but at the same time, Netanyahu needs for the U.S. to get engaged, to actually have a war with Iran because of its own internal strife inside of Israel itself. And that's something that needs to also be watched. You got the settlers becoming much more, and there are ongoing demonstrations now by the ultra conservatives not wanting to be drafted in the military. And as I pointed out earlier, you already have Netanyahu rattling the saber once again against South Lebanon and South Beirut, and that could open up that front all over again, even in Lebanon if the bombing goes on. Depends upon what happens there, but this could by summer this could really escalate into something very, very terrible.
There are only 8 million people in Israel. It's a tiny, tiny country.
Yeah.
Iran is a country of 80 million, I believe.
Yeah.
3 times the size of Iraq. They have a sophisticated military capability associated with the country. They showed a little bit of that when they attacked Israel first time around in these kind of long-range strikes. What does the U.S. military believe, or what does the Trump administration believe that they can accomplish? And do they believe that there won't be a response from Iran if indeed they struck Iran? I mean, even if you hit Iran with nukes. Look, I had a conversation with Morandi, and he pointed out, he says, we have been preparing for the U.S. for decades. We have assumed that they were going to attack us in the way that they attacked Iraq, and we were in preparations for that. We are not overly concerned about Israel. We are concerned about the U.S., and we're making preparations for it even now. So does the U.S. fully believe that they can take out everything that Iran has at their disposal with one military strike? And do you believe that the U.S. can do that with one strike?
First of all, to answer your question immediately, I don't believe that any of the militaries can do it in a full-blown military strike initially. However, I don't think that's going to be the strategy. I think the strategy could be, if you look at the examples of what happened with going after the leadership both of Hamas and Hezbollah to try and neutralize them, even though their little minions are still running around. It suggests to me that Israel's approach may be to go after the leadership in Iran. The leadership, as well as the IRGC leadership, as well as the nuclear scientists themselves, and pinpoint taking out those levels of leadership in order to cripple. It won't destroy it. They won't go with the hope that internally things can change internally. I think that could. The United States may not want to get involved ultimately, or Trump may realize that if he goes full bore and backs Netanyahu, it's going to poison the relationship he has with these other countries, and he may not want to risk that. I don't think, but you never know. But right now, that's my thinking, and I think that's why Netanyahu and his people may be considering a more surgical approach.
You're talking about murdering the Ayatollah.
Yeah, exactly.
But they realize that the response to Iran will be just outrageous at that point. Like, meaning no country, like if they murdered Trump, or if they murdered Joe Biden or somebody like that, even John Kerry, the U.S. response would be outrageous. And I would imagine the same thing would be true for Iran. They have to know that.
Well, they may be prepared for that. Look, they expected that with when they took out Nasrallah. They dropped 80 tons of bombs to get him in a bunker.
I know, but that's Lebanon. That's not Iran. Lebanon is a
but it tells you, but when they went after Nasrallah, he represented something larger than just the leader of Hezbollah. He was the movement. Mm-hmm. He was something much larger in life than just a leader of Hezbollah. And he was a leader in the whole Shia movement. And when that happened, it almost decapitated Hezbollah, and they quieted down and they actually settled.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. They didn't destroy them, but they have been muted considerably. And
But Lebanon doesn't even have
we
air
don't
defense.
know. Here's the other thing: we don't know the extent. I mean, we hear reports, but we don't know the extent of the damage that the last Israeli attack actually did on command control or missile defenses in Iran. When they claim that, well, we really socked it to them. Well, I don't know that, but the Iranians are saying, no, you didn't. So I don't know which is true.
Yeah.
I don't know whether their capabilities were actually diminished or not in reality, because you're getting conflicting stories. That has a bearing on this. Will the Iranians have sufficient defenses to counter any surgical attacks by missiles? And it would have to be done by missiles against the leadership, both of the supreme leader and the IRGC. I don't know.
Michael, I really hope that this is just a campaign by Donald Trump in order to try to push a deal that he believes aggression and negotiation is a way of trying to get some kind of deal, as opposed to him actually.
I concur.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Which
we
one do you
don't.
think?
But again, we don't know the extent to which Netanyahu's influence is going to overshadow clear, good judgment. We don't have any strategic thinkers in the White House. There are none.
Why do you? I mean, how is this in Trump's interest?
It's
Like
not.
that's the part that gets me, right? Even in the first administration that Donald Trump was in, and this is gonna be the last question. This seems to be diametrically opposed to the argument that Trump made when he got in office. And look, from my point of view, Donald Trump's a flagrant liar, right? So I don't necessarily take anything he says is true. I do think that he wants the Nobel Peace Prize if he can get it. I think he
changes
does
his mind frequently. He changes his mind frequently. That's true.
Yes. And so this idea of I'm going to end wars, not start them. Okay, if I take him at his word for that, and I give him the benefit of the doubt, with Kim Jong-un, he did this notion of Rocket Man, and he was going to attack North Korea and all of this other stuff. But he eventually settled down and said, okay, I'm going to go to North Korea. I'm going to shake his hand. We're going to make a deal. And maybe in his mind, this is the way you make deals. You threaten, and then you sign a contract, and you shake the man's hand. I hope that is what's happening with Iran. So apparently, Iran has decided that it would negotiate with Donald Trump in a back channel way. Donald Trump sent that letter for 2 months. They just sent a letter back telling him something. The tone and details of the letter have not been exposed. Does this mean that they're willing to negotiate even if it's back channel? And does this?
Well, it depends upon what the supreme leader decides.
Oh,
the president.
Right. What is in that letter? If he says go F yourself, and that's all.
Yeah. I mean, he may have, there's internal problems in Iran right now. I don't know if Morandi got into that with you or not, but there are internal issues. I know that the president wants to wants to negotiate. The supreme leader is too cynical, has a more cynical outlook because he's dealt with Trump before. So it's going to be questionable. But what is not being considered in my mind is the geostrategic impact. Should Iran be attacked, what that will do with respect to Russia and China, who have this major reliance on Iran for its own purposes, its own foreign policy and geopolitical purposes. So that needs to be weighed in. And I'm not hearing any debate at the national level about that. You never hear any White House commentary on that.
Agreed.
It's always backing Netanyahu. So I think we're in a wait and see attitude. I hope we see something that indicates that this kind of geostrategic consideration is in play in all of this. The fact that we haven't seen any attack yet, maybe that means maybe they're deliberating after all. We just don't know it. I don't know. But it's getting very tenuous, and as I said, Netanyahu is on a timetable. He needs to have action in order for his own self-preservation. So there's that pressure that's coming from Netanyahu on Trump. And I understand that an Israeli delegation, was just here to discuss war plans.
That's
against
disturbing.
Iran.
That's disturbing. Oh, look, I think if Iran is attacked, all hell breaks loose. I really
yeah.
do. I don't think they're going to accept being hit by the U.S. or Israel. I don't think they're just going to blow that off. I think Russia is going to feel some kind of way about it. I think China is going to feel some kind of way about it. I think Saudi Arabia is going to feel some kind of way about it,
Of
especially
course, they
since
all will.
all of them.
And the Gulf Arab countries have no control. They when you put U.S. and Israel together, they can't begin to mount anything against that. They can't begin to.
Michael Maloof, man himself, former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, author, and regularly contributing analyst to RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service experience in the U.S. Department of Defense. Michael, you are always welcome on the show. Thank you, my man. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day, Jamal.
You too. Be safe. Always appreciate Michael. Always appreciate his point of view. I agree with him. It is terrifying that there are not large discussions about the ramifications of an attack on Iran. I think it is outrageous that some people are making this argument that, oh, we'll hit them once and they'll just, accept our hit. I think that's crazy. The idea that you're going to use nukes and the rest of the world is going to be okay with you using nukes, I think is outrageous. We will see how this turns out. Trump could be just talking with the idea of trying to get a deal. I don't know. I want to go to my guest